Hello, I am Gregory, and it is time to grade the pen and ink combinations for February 2025. And as you see, there are 20 pens and inks, technically 21 inks. We'll get to that in a moment. There's a lot of these. I'm going to try and be brief. And then, going through these and talking about why I gave the scores I did. And then we'll do the top 10 plus an honorable mention. So, all right. So let's get right into it. All right. First up, we have the Bennu Daily Mate in Relaxing Sunday with a broad nib. This is loaded with Diamine Greed, which is a Colt Pens exclusive. So I give the pen an 8. It looks amazing. I love this color. It's a very good writer. Not a perfect nib, but this is ridiculous. The number of turns it takes to cap and uncap. Plus, there's not like a smooth capping experience as far as getting it started. I often get cross-threading, so that has not been a joy, but writing with it has. So it still gets an 8. The ink. I love that ink. It's a yellowish green or a greenish yellow with lots of shading and tons of gold shimmer. So that has been super fun to write with. I actually wrote this pen dry. I was writing a letter, and I think I ended up getting through like a page and a half. This is a pretty wet writer. It lays down a lot of ink, so it works great with shimmer inks. Yeah, but so overall, and that ink gets a 10. So overall, that combination gets a 9. All right. Now to the Conklin All-American in Yellowstone. This is a gorgeous pen. This is a broad nib loaded with Schaefer Script Brown. So the pen, definitely a 9. It couldn't be much better, but there's just that little bit of room for improvement. Nothing bad to say about this pen. It's a joy to write with. I love that it's on the beefy side. And Schaefer Script Brown, that's up there. That's one of my favorite browns, and it performs very well, and you get some very nice shading. So yeah, so pen gets a 9, ink gets a 9, overall score 9. All right. All right, so we have the Conklin Durgraph in amber with an Omniflex nib. Another gorgeous pen. And originally I loaded this with Private Reserve Pearlescent Red Silver. And that literally lasted a few days because I'll zoom in and show that it looks horrible. Tons of feathering on like just about every paper imaginable. You get spread, you get bleed through. It's a beautiful ink, but when you can't perform it like that, yeah. So that initially ruined the experience of this pen. But I decided to call it quits after a few days, cleaned it out really good, and then replaced the ink with Monteverde Copper Noir. So the pen, wonderful writing experience, one of the best Omniflex nibs I've used. this is a very, very good Omniflex. Nice and super bouncy. So yeah, a fun writing experience with that. So the Private Reserve Pearlescent Red Silver got a 1 because, I mean, that's not a joy to write with at all. It doesn't matter how pretty the color is. The ink has to perform. And I kind of wonder, how was this ink released on the market? Like, did they not test it? Seriously. Anyway, but then I replaced it with Monteverde Copper Noir, which got a 9, mostly because of the color. That ink is a bit touchy with some papers. Not nearly as bad as the Private Reserve Pearlescent Red Silver, but yeah, it's still just a little bit touchy. If it wrote flawlessly, that would be one of my favorites. Actually, has some excellent shading, and I apologize for the very tiny. When I made this layout, I didn't factor in the fact that some things, some pens or inks might be replaced, but nevertheless, so that got a 9. So overall, the first score was a 5 for the combination. The second score was a 9 for the combination. Then we have this. The Conklin Hippocrates. This is the 1.1 stub. And this, hands down, is the best stub nib I've ever used. It's super smooth, very, very forgiving, pure joy to write with this pen. I am in love with this pen, definitely. And it's inked up with Conklin Hippocrates, which is the ink that came with it in the set. Very good. It does have some shading, and with black inks, I definitely prefer a solid black. So it gets a point off of that. So the pen gets a 10, definitely, easily. The ink gets a 9, so the average score is 9.5. All right. So we have another troublemaker here. Okay, the pen was very good. So this is the Conklin Mark Twain Crescent Demo with a broad nib. I love this. Being able to see inside and see how this pen works. Especially when I have another crescent filler. And it's very nice being able to see in there and see how this pen actually works. Joy to write with. That's a super broad nib on there. And it is loaded with Conklin Dark Rust. So the pen, super joy to write with, gets a 9. The ink, the ink gets a 6. It's another troublemaker ink. Not nearly as bad as the Private Reserve Pearlescent Red Silver. Not nearly as bad. But it definitely has some feathering. Definitely has some bleed through. So I was really disappointed in that. Yeah. Difficult ink there. The color's good. It's not... Again, I said this in my original review of the ink. It doesn't quite strike me as rust. The lighter parts of the ink come off a little pink to me, and that's just not a color you see in rust. At least I haven't. Anyway, so the pen, a 9. The ink, a 6, for an average of 7.5. All right. So this is the Diplomat Arrow, stripes, black, with a broad nib. Loaded with Sailor Yurimeku Kyokuya. The pen, a 9. It could be a little bit smoother. There's some definite feedback. Definitely not scratchy. But there's some definite feedback. So that keeps it from being a 10. Otherwise, I mean, design-wise, this is like right up my alley, man. I love this. And then the ink, I really love that line of inks, Yurimeku. Although I adore this ink, it's not one of my favorites from that line. There's some really good ones in that line. So, but this is right up there. So the pen gets a 9, the ink gets a 9. Overall score, a 9. All right, this is one, I haven't written it dry, but it's very low on ink now. So this is the Hongdian 100 metal engraving with a long blade nib. Loaded with Robert Oster African Gold. This pen is just stunning. Like, every little detail of this pen is just stunning. I love it. I will say that the long blade, it provides some character to the writing, but I was expecting a little bit more from it. And you sacrifice just a little bit of smoothness for that long blade nib. Yeah, but still, the pen gets a 9. That's one of my favorite inks, Robert Oster African Gold. So the pen gets a 9, the ink gets a 10, for an average score of 9.5. All right, so this is one of the Lamy ABC knockoffs. The Jinhao 62, and I'm calling this one dark green wood because it had no name to the color. With a fine nib. The ink is ostrich chestnut. The pen, I mean, for what it is, it's a great pen, actually. But at the same time, you know, it's essentially a student pen, or even a children's pen, you might say. So the pen gets a 7. The ink, I want to love it, but I was expecting a much different, much darker color. So the ink gets an 8. So the average is 7.5. All right, then its little brother here. The Jinhao 62 in light green wood is what I'm calling it, with an extra fine nib. And this is loaded with ostrich cactus. The pen, yeah, maybe you know my thoughts on extra fine nibs. There's little, if any, joy in writing with an extra fine nib. And I have pretty much always found that to be the case. So this one gets an even lower score. So it gets a 6. The ink is a very nice green and performed well in this pen. So the ink actually gets a 9. So that gets a 7.5 also. All right, then we have the Jinhao 88 in black with a fine nib. I think this is just a beautiful pen. Very slender, but a beautiful pen. And that's just loaded with one of the cartridges that came with it, Jinhao Blue. So the pen gets an 8. It's a bit narrow for me. And, you know, it has that fine nib, which is great for a fine nib, but, you know, fine and certainly extra fine are not my favorites. Nevertheless, it still gets an 8. It's been a great writer. The ink, it's a very nice blue. I have no complaints about the ink there. But it didn't it didn't wow me, so I give that a 7 for an average of 7.5. All right, then we have the Jinhao 100 in teal and ivory, and again, that I think that was my description there. This is with a medium nib, and this is loaded up with ostrich withered sakura. The pen is good. It feels, the overall feel of it is kind of cheap. It's not impressive to hold it somehow. It just feels very plasticky. It looks great though. And it was a good writer. So that does get a score of 8. That ink is so dangerously close to that dusty pink I'm looking for. It's a little more, slightly more purple leaning. So it's not quite that dusty pink that I'm looking for, but it's still a beautiful, beautiful color. I have noticed when the pen sits and the ink that's actually still in the nib in the feed dries out a little bit, it actually gets much darker than this. But it hasn't been an issue, so no complaints there. So that ink is definitely one of my favorite inks. It's gorgeous. So the pen gets an 8, the ink gets a 10 for an average of 9. All right, we're on to another bit of a troublemaker ink here. Hopefully you can see that. So this is the Kaweco Piston All Sport in black with a double broad nib, loaded with Monteverde Mango Mousse. The pen would easily be a 10, but it has one of those nibs that is just a hair off of perfect. So I couldn't bring myself to give the pen a 10, but so close. And the ink, I would totally give a 10 as my favorite orange. It has some very nice shading, but it's a little bit of a troublemaker. So I was getting some bleed through and just a little bit of feathering. Even on this paper, you can see just a hint of feathering. Yeah, so that prevents it from being a 10. But still, the pen, a 9, the ink, a 9, for an average of 9. All right, so this is the Monteverde MP1 in black noir with a broad nib. It's the metal Twisby lookalike. And this is loaded with Diamine Writer's Blood. The pen gets a 9. It would easily get a 10 if it didn't have a known issue with the piston that apparently there's no way to fix. So when inking the pen and certainly when you're cleaning the pen, be careful not to force the piston all the way down to the bottom, because you'll mess up those rubber parts on the piston, and then it'll allow ink back here, and that's something that can't be fixed. Diamine Writer's Blood, I love it. It's a nice wet ink. It can be a little bit misbehaved. And I can't help but compare it to Oxblood, Diamine Oxblood, which is my preference. So that ink gets an 8, the pen gets a 9, for an average of 8.5. All right, this is another beautiful pen. Again, I think I said this last month or at the beginning of the month. If you don't like Monteverde pens because they're heavy and metal pens, look into this. So this is the Monteverde Mountains of the World in Orange Mountain with a medium nib. Has the acrylic body and much lighter. So if you have any hesitation about using heavy pens, this is the one for you. It's actually a very long pen. It's very long, but yeah, I really enjoy the look of it. It is loaded with Monteverde Black, so I believe I just put one of the, I'm pretty sure I just put one of the cartridges that came with the pen. I put that in there. So the pen gets a 9. Fantastic writer, no real complaints. The ink is, it's just kind of a standard black, nothing really exciting or standing out about it. I do wonder why I gave this an 8, and yet I gave the Conklin Hippocrates ink a 9. I'm not sure what the discrepancy is there. Probably just because that is such a joyful writing experience, mostly because of the pen. Yeah. Nevertheless, I gave the ink an 8. So the pen is a 9, the ink is an 8 for an average of 8.5. Okay, here's this one. Oh my goodness. All right, so this is the Monteverde Super Mega carbon fiber with an OmniFlex nib. Just recently published the video for this one. Be sure and check that out. And very heavy pen, but it's just so impressive to look at, so impressive to hold. It does have that OmniFlex nib, which is good, but it's not as good as the one on the Conklin Durograph. It's not as good as that one. That one is amazing. Nevertheless, this is still a very good writer. So again, the Monteverde Super Mega carbon fiber with an OmniFlex nib, and this is loaded with Conklin Vintage Purple. So the pen gets an 8, mostly because the nib is not quite as bouncy as that other one. And then the ink gets a 9. Definitely one of my favorite purples. It's certainly up there. So the pen gets an 8, the ink a 9. So the average is 8.5. All right, we're on the home stretch here. So this, I already declared this is the best pen in my collection. It's a complete joy to write with this pen. Super smooth, bouncy writing experience, just pure joy. So it goes without saying, the Pilot E95S in deep red with a medium nib gets a 10 easily. And it's loaded with just one of the cartridges I had, Pilot Black, which definitely not one of my favorite black inks. Yeah, so that gets a 7. So unfortunately that ink score really drags this down. I believe for next month, it remains to be seen, but I believe for next month I did just get in some Pilot Iroshizuku cartridges. So I'm probably going to switch over to that. But we'll see. I have a lot of new pens that I'm eager to try, so we'll see. So the pen gets a 10, ink gets a 7, so this averaged 8.5. All right, this has been a just, you know, a good pen to use. Super happy I picked it up. These Schaefer Awards, this is the Schaefer Award in brushed steel with a medium nib. They're so much better than the Schaefer Pops. So much better. And I recently picked up another pen on eBay that claimed to be a Schaefer Award, but I'm convinced it's not. I think it's an early Schaefer Pop. Nevertheless, this is the Schaefer Award brushed steel with medium nib, loaded with Diamine Earl Grey. The pen gets an 8. You know, it's a good pen for the price, a very good pen for the price, and these are hard to find now. So I would pick them up while you can. This particular one I got on Peyton Street Pens. So if you want to pick this up, I recommend that, Peyton Street Pens. And yeah, the Diamine Earl Grey. Oh man, I think I mentioned this before. It's one of those inks where it calls itself gray, but it's not gray. It's black. I mean, there's aspects to it that are gray, but overall, you look at it, it's black. So the pen gets an 8. Just, you know, nothing remarkable, but definitely enjoyable. The ink gets a 7 because, you know, it's not quite gray, it's not quite black. You know, it's in that gray area. Oh, that was good. So that gets a 7. So the pen gets an 8, ink gets a 7. The average is 7.5. This, on the other hand, this is the Schaefer Intensity in ultramarine striped with a broad nib, loaded with Krishna Monsoon Sky. The pen has been a joy to write with. I have always wanted a Schaefer pen with a broad nib, and here one is. And let me tell you, it is a joy to write with. So I give this a 9 simply because the pen is a little on the narrow side, especially the section there. And plus it's a long, straight metal section, so you can get a little bit of slippage there on your grip. And although I like the look of it, it could look better, honestly. But still, I give it a 9 because it's a fantastic writer. Super happy with it. The ink is one of my favorite blue inks. Krishna Monsoon Sky. I used to think that my favorite blue inks would just be like solid blue. But this has challenged that belief. In fact, it has not only challenged it, it has destroyed that belief, because that ink is gorgeous. So the pen gets a 9, ink gets a 10 easily, for an average score of 9.5. Just a couple left. All right, so this is kind of going to be a spoiler. But this is the TWSBI Eco in creme with rose gold and a broad nib, loaded with Sailor Yorimeku Kitsune Biori. This pen is so smooth, like absolutely smooth, and pure joy to write with it. And that ink coming out of it, that's my happy place. It's like a gray, but it's like a warm gray, And of course, these Urameku inks do magical things on the paper. So easily the pen is a 10. Easily the ink is a 10. Making an average of a 10. All right, and the last one. This pen has been a surprise for me, let me tell you. So this is the Visconti Breeze in lemon. Very, very bright pen. With a medium nib, and that is loaded with ostrich grass. So this pen, again, it surprised me because I got it on a huge discount, and the videos I watched about this pen, there were more complaints than compliments. Yeah, but you know what, for the price, I was like, who cares? Who cares what other people think? I'm going to try for myself. And I'm so glad I did. I'm super impressed with this pen. In fact, I couldn't even explain to you why I gave it a 9 instead of a 10, other than the fact that it's so bright, so bright. Nevertheless, this pen easily gets a 9, easily. If I was giving half scores, I probably would have given it a 9.5, honestly. The ink, I love that green. There's some very, very nice shading on that. So that also gets a 9. A joyful combination. I love seeing that ink come out of this pen. So the pen gets a 9, ink gets a 9, for an average of 9. All right. So now we're on to the top 10, and from the scores, from one of the scores, you already know what the number 1 pen is, but nevertheless, I'll save it for last. So the honorable mention is the Jinhao 100 Teal Ivory with medium nib, loaded with ostrich withered sakura. Again, it mostly got that score because of the ink. That ink is, I love it so much. There, that'll work. All right. And let me tell you, there were a lot of tie scores. So one thing I'll say is the first tiebreaker is the pen score. So if there's a tie, the one with the higher pen score wins the tie. If there's still a tie after that, then it's purely a matter of, you know, aesthetically what the pen does for me. So, yeah. In 10th place, we have the Bennu Daily Mate Relaxing Sunday with a broad nib loaded with diamine greed. This was a joy to write with in the letters, so I was happy it made it into the top 10. But the capping and uncapping is just, that's ridiculous. All right, in 9th place, we have the Conklin Durograph in amber with an Omniflex nib, loaded with Monteverde Copper Noir. Coming in at 8th place, we have the Visconti Breeze in lemon with a medium nib, loaded with ostrich grass. All right, in 7th place, we have the Conklin All-American in Yellowstone with a broad nib, loaded with Schaefer Script Brown. Just a beautiful, beefy pen. Feels super good in the hand. Yeah. All right, then in 6th place, we have the Kaweco Piston All Sport, loaded with Monteverde Mango Mousse. Very nice. Beautiful pen. I love the weight of it. Then we have my Diplomat Arrow. I still want to get the orange and black version of this. That was the one I originally wanted, but this came at a better price. So the Diplomat Arrow, stripes black with a broad nib, loaded with Sailor Yurimeku Kyokuya. Now this was a bit of a surprise. The Schaefer Intensity in 4th place. The Schaefer Intensity with ultramarine striped with a broad nib, loaded with Krishna Monsoon Sky. Oh, that ink. In 3rd place, we have the Hongdian 100. I mean, look at this pen. Look at it. So that's the Hongdian 100 metal engraving with a long blade, loaded with Robert Oster African Gold. This was not really a surprise. This is the Conklin Hippocrates, loaded with Conklin Hippocrates ink. Hands down, the best stub nib. Just, oh. It makes me always want to use this pen. Can I do that? Sure I can. Yeah, so 2nd place. This has been amazing. Now, I love my TWSBI Ecos. I'm still very passionate about buying them. I've stopped buying them. There's these new colors that come out, and I'm tempted, and then I think I have multiple pens in each of the nib sizes, so it just doesn't make sense to keep buying them. Because, I mean, I have multiples of every single nib size, so I just can't bring myself to do it. Plus, this one is perfection. An amazing, amazing writer. This is right up there with my favorite TWSBI Ecos, the Jade. That one is also wonderful. Yeah, but I have to say this surprised me. That despite, my love for TWSBI Ecos, I did not have this picked as the favorite of the month. But anyway, there you go. The TWSBI Eco in creme with rose gold and a broad nib, loaded with Sailor Yurimeku Kitsune Biori. The TWSBI Eco is the pen of the month. All right. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.